"No one wants you here," my sister said. My guardians nodded in agreement. I didn't argue, just packed my bags. This morning, my phone was blowing up with 15 missed calls. 24M, never thought my own family would be the ones to deliver the final blow, but life has a way of teaching you harsh lessons when you least expect them. The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. My sister stood in the doorway of what used to be our childhood home, her arms crossed and her face twisted with disgust. She told me that no one wanted me there anymore. Behind her, my guardians, the aunt and uncle who had taken me in after our parents died in that car crash 7 years ago, nodded in silent agreement. Their faces showed no emotion, no trace of the people who once promised they'd always be there for me. I had just graduated college with my computer science degree 3 months earlier. While my classmates were celebrating new jobs and bright futures, I was standing in that familiar hallway feeling like a stranger in the only home I had left. The smell of my aunt's cooking that once meant comfort now felt suffocating. The family photos on the walls seemed to mock me. All those smiling faces from better times when I actually believed I belonged somewhere. My sister continued her verbal assault, explaining how I was a burden they could no longer carry. She reminded me that I wasn't really their child, that they had done enough by putting me through school, and now it was time for me to figure out my own life. My uncle stepped forward and handed me an envelope with some cash, enough for maybe 2 weeks in a cheap motel, if I was careful. I wanted to argue, to remind them of all the times I had helped around the house, all the good grades I brought home, all the ways I tried to earn my place in their family. But the look in their eyes told me everything I needed to know. In their minds, I had already been erased from their story. So I didn't argue. I went upstairs to the small room that had been mine for 7 years and started packing. My clothes fit into 2 suitcases. My books and personal items filled 3 cardboard boxes. Everything I owned in the world could be loaded into my beat-up Honda Civic in less than an hour. As I packed, I could hear them downstairs discussing weekend plans like I had already vanished from their lives. The drive to the motel was a blur. I found the cheapest place I could, a rundown establishment on the edge of town where the carpet was stained and the shower barely worked. But it was mine for the next 2 weeks, and that was all I could afford to think about. I spent those first few days applying for jobs, searching for apartments I could actually afford on an entry-level salary, and trying to figure out how to rebuild a life from absolutely nothing. The rejection emails started pouring in almost immediately. Every job I had thought was a sure thing suddenly seemed impossible. My references were sparse. I had spent most of college focused on studies rather than networking, and now I was paying the price. The few interviews I managed to get led nowhere. Employers could sense my desperation, and it made them uncomfortable. By the end of the first week, I was down to my last $50 and had eaten nothing but ramen noodles and gas station sandwiches. The motel manager was already asking about my plans for the following week. I spent my days at the public library, using their computers to job hunt and trying to stay out of my depressing room as much as possible. That's when I remembered Marcus. He had been my lab partner in advanced algorithms class during senior year. One of those naturally brilliant guys who made everything look effortless. More importantly, he had mentioned during one of our late-night study sessions that his family ran a tech startup in Silicon Valley. It was a long shot, but I had nothing left to lose. I crafted the most professional email I could manage, explaining my situation without sounding too desperate. I attached my resume and portfolio of programming projects, including the inventory management system I had built for a local business during my internship. I hit send and tried not to hope too hard. Marcus responded within 2 hours. His family's company was indeed looking for junior developers, and my timing was perfect. They had just landed a major contract and needed someone who could start immediately. The salary he mentioned was more money than I had ever imagined making, and they were even willing to provide relocation assistance. The phone interview went better than I could have dreamed. Within 3 days, I had a job offer, a signing bonus, and a plane ticket to California. I used my last $20 to extend my motel stay for 2 more nights, just long enough to get my affairs in order. The startup turned out to be everything Marcus had promised and more. The work was challenging but rewarding. My coworkers treated me like family, and for the first time since my parents died, I felt like I actually belonged somewhere. The company culture was built around innovation and taking care of each other, concepts that felt foreign after my recent experiences, but incredibly healing. Within 6 months, I had been promoted twice. My algorithm's background made me invaluable for optimizing their core systems, and my dedication to the work impressed everyone around me. The company founders took me under their wing, mentoring me not just in business, but in life. They helped me find an apartment in a great neighborhood, introduced me to their network of contacts, and made sure I knew I was valued. A year later, I was leading a team of 5 other developers. We were working on a revolutionary project that would change how businesses manage their supply chains. The potential impact was enormous, and several major corporations were already expressing interest in licensing our technology. That's when the stock options and profit-sharing agreements started making real sense. The company was preparing to go public, and early employees like me stood to benefit significantly from the IPO. The numbers my financial advisor showed me were staggering. Enough money to buy a house, invest for the future, and never worry about being homeless again. But money wasn't the only thing that had changed in my life. I had found my confidence, my purpose, and most importantly, my voice. The scared young man who had packed his belongings in silence was gone, replaced by someone who knew his worth and wouldn't accept being treated as disposable ever again. Which brings me to this morning. I woke up to 15 missed calls on my phone, all from numbers I recognized, but hadn't heard from in almost 2 years. My sister, my aunt, my uncle, even some cousins I barely remembered, they had all tried to reach me between midnight and 7 in the morning. The voicemails painted a clear picture. Someone had done their research and discovered that the awkward kid they had discarded was now making headlines in the tech industry. A local newspaper had run a feature story about successful college graduates from the area, and my name was prominently featured alongside details about my company and our upcoming IPO. My sister's first message was tentative, almost apologetic. She said she had seen the article and wanted to congratulate me on my success. She mentioned how proud the family was and how they had always believed in me. The irony was so thick I almost laughed out loud. By the third message, her tone had shifted to something more familiar, the entitled expectation that had defined our relationship for years. She explained that they were having some financial difficulties and thought maybe I could help out with a loan. Nothing too crazy, just enough to help them get back on their feet. After all, we were family. My aunt's messages followed a similar pattern. She started with awkward pleasantries about how much they missed me and how sorry they were that we had lost touch. But soon she was detailing their mortgage troubles and wondering if I might be willing to help them avoid foreclosure. She reminded me of all they had done for me and how this would be my chance to give back to the people who had raised me. My uncle was more direct. He told me that family was supposed to take care of each other and that my success meant nothing if I forgot where I came from. He suggested that I owed them for the years they had supported me, and that helping them now would be the right thing to do. I sat in my spacious apartment, looking out at the San Francisco Bay, and felt something I hadn't expected: pity. Not anger, not hurt, but genuine sadness for people who had become so desperate that they were willing to swallow their pride and reach out to someone they had thrown away like garbage. The final message was from my sister again, and this one was different. Her voice was shaking as she admitted that they had made mistakes in how they handled things when I left. She said they realized now that they had been wrong to treat me the way they did. She begged me to call back, claiming that family was the most important thing and that they wanted me back in their lives. I spent the morning thinking about how to respond. Part of me wanted to ignore them completely, to let them wonder and worry the same way I had wondered and worried during those terrifying first weeks on my own. But I realized that would make me just like them, and I had worked too hard to become a better person to slide backward now. Instead, I decided to respond in the most powerful way possible, with the truth. I called my sister back first, knowing she would relay everything to the others. When she answered, her voice was eager and hopeful. She immediately started talking about how wonderful it was to hear from me and how much they had all missed having me around. I let her talk for a few minutes before I interrupted her. I told her that I appreciated her reaching out, but I wanted to be clear about something. I explained that the young man who had left their house 2 years ago with nothing but some clothes and $50 had died in that motel room. The person she was talking to now had been reborn through struggle, hard work, and the kindness of people who actually cared about him. I described my journey, the hungry nights, the desperate job searches, the crushing loneliness of having no one to call when things got difficult. I explained how I had built myself up from nothing while they continued their lives without giving me a second thought. My sister tried to interrupt several times, attempting to apologize or explain their actions, but I wasn't interested in excuses. I had spent months in therapy working through the trauma of being abandoned by the only family I had left, and I wasn't about to let them rewrite history now that it was convenient for them. I told her about Marcus and his family's company, about the mentors who had seen potential in me when my own family saw only a burden. I described the satisfaction of proving my worth to people who actually valued talent and dedication over blood relations. When she started crying and begging for forgiveness, I felt that familiar pang of sympathy that had always been my weakness with family. But I had learned to recognize manipulation, and I wasn't going to fall for it again. I explained that I held no anger toward them anymore, that I had forgiven them for my own peace of mind, not for theirs. But forgiveness didn't mean forgetting, and it certainly didn't mean pretending that we had the kind of relationship where I would bail them out of their financial problems. I told her that the money they were hoping for would be going toward much better causes. I had already set up a scholarship fund for foster children aging out of the system, and I was planning to donate a significant portion of my IPO proceeds to organizations that helped young people who had been abandoned by their families. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for almost a full minute. When my sister finally spoke, her voice had changed completely. The fake sweetness was gone, replaced by the familiar edge of resentment I remembered from our childhood. She accused me of being selfish and cruel, of forgetting where I came from and abandoning the people who had sacrificed for me. I almost laughed at the irony. She was lecturing me about abandonment while simultaneously proving that she hadn't learned anything from our history. I told her that she was absolutely right about one thing. I had forgotten where I came from. I had forgotten what it felt like to be unwanted, unloved, and treated as disposable. And I intended to keep forgetting those feelings for the rest of my life. Before I hung up, I told her that she could stop calling. I explained that I had built a real family now, one based on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine affection rather than obligation and guilt. These people had earned their place in my life through their actions, and they would never ask me to choose between my success and their approval. I ended the call and immediately blocked all their numbers. Then I called my mentor at the company and told him about the situation. He listened without judgment and then shared his own story of cutting toxic family members out of his life. He reminded me that the family we choose is often more important than the family we're born into. That evening, I had dinner with Marcus and his parents, the people who had become my real family over the past 2 years. We talked about the upcoming IPO, my scholarship fund plans, and our excitement about the new projects on the horizon. Nobody mentioned obligations or debts or what I owed anyone for past favors. As I drove home that night, I thought about the scared young man who had packed his belongings in silence 2 years ago. He had been so desperate for acceptance that he would have done anything to keep his place in a family that didn't want him. Now I understood that their rejection had been the greatest gift they could have given me. I pulled out my phone and looked at the blocked numbers, 15 missed calls that represented everything I had left behind. Then I deleted them permanently and drove toward my future, finally free from the weight of people who had never deserved a place in my story anyway. The IPO launched 3 months later, and the financial success exceeded even our wildest projections. But the real victory wasn't the money. It was the knowledge that I had built something meaningful with people who valued me for who I was, not what I could do for them. That's a kind of wealth that no amount of money can buy, and it's something that can never be taken away by people who were never worthy of it in the first place.